You're watching College Sports Rushes the 10 on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome to the 10, presented by Bet Rivers, a weekly Big Ten basketball podcast, part of the Bet Rivers Network. We are into the Elite Eight, and when I say we, on behalf of Big Ten Nation, I really mean the Michigan State Spartans. As good of a first weekend as it was for the Big Ten Conference, not as great of a second weekend thus far. We lost 3 of our fellow Big Ten participants in this tournament. But the Spartans hold strong, and we're here to give you a betting preview of Michigan State and Auburn. I'm your host, Greg Waddell. We've got Doug Kazarian and Troy Macker here with me as always. First, before we get into the X's and O's, Doug, I want to throw it to you. Broad takeaways from the Sweet 16.
You know, it's funny. We're not getting the abnormal performance. Everything that's played out is sort of what we expected, whether it's Houston in a rock fight or Tennessee and Kentucky, tough to beat a good team 3 straight times. But even in the Big Ten, like they are who we thought they were, right? And I even jokingly said that the last time we got together on the pod. It's the team that's still standing is who we thought it could be, right? Sparty, the what I thought was the best team in the Big Ten. They have to obviously have a tough task ahead of them with the number 1 overall seed, but the tournament has played out, and we just don't have those Cinderella like we talked about for the last week, and just all the narratives. And Purdue had its chance, but ultimately, if you told me before the tournament there'd be one team standing in the Elite Eight, I would have picked Michigan State with Tom Izzo on the cusp of yet another Final Four.
Yeah, I think they are who we thought they were is my takeaway as well. It feels like, honestly, like exaggerated versions of tropes that we talked about with all of these teams all season long ended up getting us to this conclusion where the team that won the regular season by 3 games is the last team standing in the tournament. But almost as a microcosm for what Michigan State's season was, we in January were doing like, oh, is it just the schedule with Michigan State? Let's wait until they play some good teams. They had a couple upsets in their path to get to this Elite Eight. And now here comes the number 1 overall seed, which we'll see if they can do what they did in the Big Ten regular season and basically shut all the critics up and assert their dominance again. But I thought Michigan and Purdue and Maryland gave inspired runs through this tournament, but ultimately the flaws that they've shown throughout the season caught up to them here. I thought it was incredibly fitting that Purdue's final possession of their year ended with giving up an offensive rebound and no rim protection on the final play. I thought Michigan's season ending where it did, where they blew a big lead, incredibly fitting after we've watched 2.5 months of that. And Maryland, I don't know what to make of them. Honestly, I think they got a raw deal with Kevin Willard with 2 feet out the door. But either way, these teams lived up to the reasons we've loved betting on these teams all year. Troy, anything to add from your perspective on the weekend that was?
Yeah, I completely echo your sentiments on kind of the ways the team exited or a microcosm of their issues throughout the year. The Maryland one, a little bit of, they didn't have the legs to go deep into a game against one of the deepest teams in the country. That was always a concern. But it's good to know that these issues reared their ugly head, so to speak, against elite teams. It didn't bite them against the St. Peter's or an FDU or a Florida Gulf Coast. It was very even. Like, I think they are who we thought they were. They have good teams with flaws, better teams with more athletes, better shooting, better pace of play. We're going to pose problems. And I think that's what happened. I think the March Madness NCAA tournament is the greatest tournament on the planet, save maybe the World Cup. However, it's not always the best way to determine the best team throughout the entire season. This year, it is, because we actually do have the best teams. They've had to play each other. There was no blow-up region where the bracket dissolved. So this has been a really good way to determine who the best team in the country. And even if, let's say, a Texas Tech wins the whole thing, I think they will have earned it hand over fist, having to beat the teams that are still left, including 4 teams from the best conference in the country and potentially the best conference of all time for one season in the SEC.
Yeah, it's going to end up a gauntlet for these final 3 rounds. And as far as the remaining Big Ten team is concerned, I don't know that Michigan State would want it any other way at this point. They kind of love embracing the underdog mentality, and they're officially going to be able to adopt that once again for this game with Auburn in the Elite Eight. Without further ado, let's get to it, gentlemen. Michigan State, an underdog against Auburn, plus 195 on the money line at Bet Rivers. Auburn -5, -245 to win outright. And then our total is set at 149. This should be a fascinating game. Two great coaches, two great teams that have had awesome seasons. Doug, what are you expecting here?
I think it's a really tough matchup for Michigan State. Auburn has the athleticism to match them and can kind of flip a switch like Sparty can typically at the end of the first half into the second half. And it's crazy how the Spartans have done this to a T, right? We've talked about it. We said Ole Miss first half, Michigan State second half coming into this game. And it's wild. And even the Tigers are a team that is, ripe for an upset, even though they're the number one overall seed, really can kind of play the underdog role, right? Bruce Pearl can say no one believes in us, much like Kirby Smart sometimes did that with Georgia, even though they're the top ranked team. But it was not a trendy team, if you will, in your office pools. It was Florida, it was Duke, not the Tigers, just given how they were sort of limping to the finish line. And I do think coaching, this is where Izzo flexes, if you will. Coming into the Sweet 16, he was 10-5. I'm going off memory. So he's now 11-5 in Sweet 16 games when he's had about 4 or 5 days to prepare. He's 8-2 in the Elite Eight, right? So he's been to 8 Final Fours, only lost twice, and a couple of those times he was an underdog, right? He had those nice, impressive runs. So the less than 48-hour turnaround is really when Izzo shines. And I think this is an opportunity for him to really cement his leg. If he can pull this off on a short turnaround, now he's got depth, he's got some studs, but not like Auburn does. And, Janai Broom's probably not going to win Player of the Year based on the odds coming into the when the voting closed, but still the runner-up if at worst. So I just think it's a bad matchup, but I'm not running to the window to bet against Izzo, given what he's done in these junctures. So I don't think I'm late to the party on this because I haven't necessarily bet it first half, but I'll take Auburn in the first half, even though they're not a dynamic team right now in the last month. It's just the way Michigan State sort of wants to feel out the early rounds of a boxing match until the late, or like they want to start, ramp up the pressure at the end of the first half, like the last 5 minutes into the second half. So I'll go with Auburn sort of early, if you will, on the first half.
I think that's a wise way to approach this. We've talked about it in the last couple of weeks here, where Michigan State sort of plays around early in the game. They start players that don't play most of the second half usually, although they flipped that against Ole Miss. Shimon Zapala finally came out of the starting lineup. So, you never really know what to expect. There's a feeling out process with Michigan State games that is almost constant in the first 10 minutes, and then they wear you down gradually, and they dominate second halves. That's been the story of the full season. So I actually agree with you, Doug. If you're looking to back Auburn here, I would feel significantly more comfortable doing so in the first half. This matchup, I think, is something's got to give type game because, a big part of Michigan State's identity this year does not necessarily show up in the box score or in their profile analytically. It's their mental toughness. It's the fact that they are wired like psychopaths that are just up for the challenge of being in your shorts for 40 minutes, clapping in your face and wearing you down emotionally even. It's a task to play Michigan State emotionally and mentally as much as it is physically. The problem is that Auburn is the number one psychopath team in the sport. They want to play the biggest, loudest, insane game. And the crazier the game gets emotionally, that's where they're at their best. So, if we see Jeremy Fears and Trey Holloman clapping in Tahad Pettiford and Janai Broom's face here, I don't know what's going to happen. Now, I also think Michigan State's smart enough to kind of dial that down a little bit. And then on the flip side of this, let's just call it what it is. Auburn, as great as they are, as talented as they are, they make a lot of incredibly stupid plays. And they can get sped up. And they can take tough shots. They can, they matched Michigan for turnovers in that game. That's a huge part of why Michigan built a 9-point lead was Auburn gave them 4-on-1 breakaway runouts that they just couldn't capitalize on. If Michigan State gets those opportunities with how good they are in transition, they will capitalize. Cohen Carr will be running and jumping on everybody. Jeremy Fears will get to the free throw line. So I think this is a true toss-up game. I do not feel comfortable on either side of this at the number. I think the total is pretty spot on. my gut feel tells me that the value is on Michigan State, because I do think there is a minor advantage with Tom Izzo and what he's done with this specific team this year against Bruce Pearl, who has not been all that great in NCAA tournaments going back to the pandemic. It just feels like a season and a team of destiny for Michigan State, and against an Auburn team that does give up a lot of transition opportunities. It could be just what the Michigan State offense needs. Troy, what insights can you add for us to help us with this one?
Yeah, this is a really tough game to bet because I think the numbers are really true. I think we got some really good numbers in the Sweet 16, especially on the spread line. Even though, I was salivating over Michigan, it got to plus 8.5, plus 9 even, and that didn't come close because of the second half. The one that I have been just harping on all year, and especially during the tournament, is Michigan State unders. They've hit the under in the last 3 games. They've hit the under in 11 of their last 13 games. But at 149, this is the highest over-under of the tournament for them. But it's, Auburn wants to play a frantic pace. Michigan State wants to slow it down. I think it's going to be a ebb and flow. This would be the one game, but I'm very unconvinced about hammering the under as I've done on Michigan State games because it's just tried and true. And we got close there in the Ole Miss game because of the 3 at the end, and I think a lot of people got close to a lot of things there on that 3. I think one of the issues with Michigan State in the first half against Ole Miss was the athleticism. They didn't have it. Ole Miss had far more athleticism, and Ole Miss was not the most athletic team in the SEC. Auburn far more athletic than Ole Miss. I think that is going to be a major concern. Who on Michigan State matches up against Janai Broome? Even like Chad Baker-Mazara, who's a 6'8" small forward. Michigan State usually runs someone 6'4" to 6'6" at small forward. So I think there's going to be size issues, and the reason Michigan found success against Auburn in the Sweet 16 was because of their size. It was something that Michigan State doesn't have. I think Izzo does an incredible job at halftime. The one play I think we're all in lockstep on is Auburn first half. Michigan State has come out sluggish in a lot of first halves. Here's an interesting trend. They've lost the first half in a lot of games recently, but specifically they've lost the first half in 7 straight games when they play top 5 teams. And Auburn, obviously a top 5 team. I could absolutely see Auburn being up at halftime, but we know that Izzo is a master of halftime adjustments, lending itself to Doug's comment about being able to adjust in under 48 hours. He's able to adjust in 30 minutes. That's what makes him so excellent is seeing what he's been given and making adjustment. Here's another interesting aspect of that. They just played Ole Miss. Ole Miss played Auburn at least twice, I believe, this year. So when they watch film, they will have muscle memory on the Ole Miss players and what they were able to do against Auburn and what Michigan State was able to do against Ole Miss, as opposed to just watching 10 guys on a court and try to, having never played any of them. So I think that is also a little feather in the cap of Michigan State. From where the public is on this at Bet Rivers, no surprise that 82% of the money and 70% of the tickets are on Auburn to win. 59% of the money and 58% of the tickets are on Michigan State to cover. And 62% of the money and 67% of the tickets are on the over. Like you guys have said, this is a really tough game to bet. I think there is value on Michigan State, though I think if they win, it's going to be in a comeback role in the second half. I think this game opens itself up to a lot of live betting opportunities in and around halftime, especially if Michigan State, trails for the first half and you can get them at, a number in and around what they are now at plus 195. I would much rather take them, down 4 heading halftime at plus 195 if that option is there. But in terms of, I don't think there's a lot of value on taking Auburn to win at minus 245, and at 5.5, which it's going to be, is a tricky number for me. I would probably say over, even though that goes against everything I believe in Michigan State, just because I think this game is going to be played in the 70s and it's going to be a tight game, and the threat of overtime is just very scary. As we're getting better teams, the games are closer. So I see this game being pretty true to 149. So I'd probably take over just because, Michigan State gets the foul line. Auburn allows their opponents to get to the foul line. I think that's going to lend itself to some points without time coming off the clock late. But this is going to be a really fun matchup. It's just a really tricky game to bet early on.
Yeah, 2 things that I'll be keeping an eye on is Michigan State getting to the free throw line? Because they didn't get there as much as they wanted against Ole Miss, and I thought that allowed the Rebels to really compete late into that game. And then Auburn, are they just dominating the boards or not? Michigan State is a team that has been awesome on the boards all season long, but Jackson Kohler, 0 points and 2 rebounds against the SEC athletes with Ole Miss. Is he up for the challenge of the best frontcourt player in the country, Janai Broom? Look, these two teams are at their best. They need to be at their best at this point in the season. I think Vegas is at their best right now, too, because they set these lines right where they need to be. Hopefully, we've given you a little bit of insight that will help you place your best bets for Michigan State against Auburn. Sounds like all three of us are aligned that we like Auburn in the first half. From there, it's anybody's game. We will have more from this show and beyond if Michigan State keeps winning. This is a Big Ten show. Hopefully, we'll be able to get more best bets in front of you this season. If not, thank you for listening to us. For Doug, for Troy, I'm Greg, for all our producers behind the scenes. We appreciate you listening to this show throughout the postseason. Check out the House Specials page for daily boost bets and special props for the NCAA tournament and the Final Four next week. Thank you for watching the 10. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching College Sports Rushes the 10 on the Bet Rivers Network.